Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
If you've ever had to give a presentation or build a deck to communicate an idea, this is an amazing episode for you to listen to. From someone who's uncovered the secret structure of great talks to having applied that and won an Academy Award for the work she's done, this episode with Nancy Duarte is amazing.
This episode's been sponsored by Quadical, fractional marketing leadership using evidence-based marketing practices. That's quadical.com.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Mark Binkley and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
Welcome to the show. Today we have Nancy Duarte. Nancy, welcome to the Sleeping Barber, your favorite podcast of today, at least.
I love barbers.
We'll take that.
For anyone who doesn't know, Nancy is the CEO and principal of Duarte, Inc., which is a creative services and presentation skills training. You might have seen her from an incredible TED Talk called The Secret Structure of Great Talks, or one of her 6 books, or the numerous articles she's written for HBR, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Wired, a couple magazines you might have heard of. Or the client this looks like a Fortune 500 or a company.
Or because my husband's cute as Antonio Banderas. Might be that too.
Or that.
Anyway, we're so excited to have you here today, Nancy. One of the V and I joke all the time about this, and just to set up this conversation, one of the things that we joke about is, like, as marketers, our job is actually not to do marketing, it's to build decks.
Yeah.
And we've all been through this experience where you've seen presentations in town halls and business meetings and luncheons, and like I even got my daughter to do a presentation of why she should get Snapchat. And there's some. She did it to us. She made an argument as to why she should get Snapchat, and had to go through the strengths and the weaknesses and the risks of getting it and all that kind of stuff.
What, did you grant her access?
Yeah, we did.
Oh.
Yeah, we did. She did. She was pretty compelling, and she was like really responsible about it.
Okay, good.
I don't know if she watched your presentation on presentations and how to give persuasive presentations, but I did coach her with knowing all the stuff that you have. So today we're talking about building persuasive presentations because we all need it.
Yeah.
It's so important, whether you're in marketing or any part of business. So I think genuinely I can say this for V and I, like, this might be one of the most exciting, most useful, most practical things that we talk about all year. And so welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So a lot of people, I'm sure, have seen your TED Talk, but can you give us a bit of a backstory on that presentation, how you got to where you are today? Like, it's not a career path that you see at, say, high school career fairs.
Yeah, it's not. Actually, we were one of the very first presentation agencies. It used to be that people had, they would do rub-on letters and have overhead transparencies. There weren't even desktop printing wasn't even a thing. You had to go to these service bureaus to do that stuff for you. So we're like, that's how long ago we started.
Yeah.
But Apple was our very first client, 88. They've been our biggest client every year since. And, their marketing strategy really is presentations. People wait in line, and millions join online to see. I mean, it's product-led presentations, and they're beautiful. So that's kind of what happened. We fell into the presentation space, and so that was kind of the lead in to getting us to be kind of the go-to presentation agency in the Silicon Valley. And then we kind of started to branch out, do multimedia, do web and all of that. And then kind of read Jim Collins' Good to Great the same year that the .com crash happened. And I was like, what? We're going to shutter, 4 out of 5 of our services, and we are going to be best in the world. We're passionate about it, best in the world at and profitable at that. So I cut everything out. And then we really did kind of set a lot of the benchmarks to transform the whole industry. One of my proudest things about writing a book and codifying what we do was that the book came out, Slideology came out in 2008. And that was the year of a significant, that's the same year that at least Merck had a economic crisis. And so we created industries. All these people started presentation companies, started to do presentation design. And it's just like, it wasn't just my firm that grew from the book, but we kind of spun everything out. You know, it just kind of spun out, which was really, I don't know, really gratifying for me.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, just one thing. I felt like we just kind of glossed it over. Your first client was Apple in 1988. So did you teach everything that Steve Jobs knew from like a presentation perspective as well?
I can't talk about the work we do for Apple.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's weird. It's but they're a huge customer and presentations are their primary way that they market and announce products and stuff. But I can't get into details about what we do. So sorry. But you can connect a lot of dots on your own.
Yeah. And they're like, which is fascinating because you also, I think, had some partnership with, oh my gosh, An Inconvenient Truth. Didn't you help with that movie as well? Yeah.
So what happened was Al Gore was on the board, or he just joined the board after he had this kind of awakening about falling back in love with what he was passionate about in the 70s after he lost the presidential election. And there's these policies that if you are on the board of a company, you can't really receive goods or services. And so Apple was like, well, here's who we use. And then he, came into the fold, and people think that the movie just appeared, but Mr. Gore was traveling the world and delivering that presentation for 5 years before the movie. So he created a groundswell. He created a lot. I mean, he got a lot of people fired up about it. And so it was like the movie created this flashpoint for a massive amount of like awakening and desire that he'd already created by traveling. I mean, he was delivering that every day, sometimes a couple times a day. All over the world for 5 years. So we worked with him for all those 5 years. We helped get the graphics ready for the movie. Yeah, we're in the credits. It's fun. He was very generous and very good to work with.
It's amazing. And so like, it's funny because in both cases, Apple and in that movie, like they're actually things that people tune into and watch, and they're presentations, which is fascinating.
I know what's funny is they called.
So great.
My biggest business mistake was when they called the movie producer and was like, would you mind donating, blah amount of thousands of dollars of work? And by then we'd been doing it for 5 years and had already been really kind of generous with our time and, and so I said, well, I told my team, I said, I don't know if anyone's going to come see a movie about a slideshow. So, and they're wealthy, the people producing it. So let's just make them pay. And that was dumb because they offered in exchange for our name to be on every single press release about the movie. And that was just dumb. Like it was one of the dumbest. Talk about a marketing podcast. Tell everyone to learn a lesson from that one. That was dumb of me.
Yeah, right.
Who knew?
I shoulda, woulda, coulda.
I know, right?
Easy to say in retrospect.
Yeah.
From that point though, like, I mean, communicating anything is complex, and especially if it's complex ideas and that kind of thing, and maybe not all things are, but like even the classic Steve Jobs, 1,000 songs in your pocket.
Yeah.
I mean, so often we see these slides that are presented at places, and it's almost like somebody's mission was to keep all of the space filled with something instead of figuring out what they want to say. It's almost like, well, let's say everything we possibly can. So why is it that communication is so complex? It's so much more complex than what we think. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, even now, right? We're sending messages to each other and receiving messages, and there's data loss, right? So I think what happens is the presenter a lot of times shows up with kind of nervous, excited, having a lot to communicate. And if you don't spend a little bit of time thinking about the audience, the one that's going to receive the message, and removing everything between you and them. So if you think about, I say something, I might be moving on the next thing. And there's just so much. The things that could interfere are bias. Like I may approach everything with bias and they have bias in how they listen. But also there can be visual noise, verbal noise. So that's one of the biggest thing in the presentation space is if I have a cluttered slide and it's going to take you a minute or 30 seconds even to read it, you cannot read and listen at the same time. Now, I think I can, but I can't. But we pretend we can. So what happens is you put this dense slide up there and you just pop in on the verbal stream, starting to wave your hands and talk to this slide. They're not listening to you, they're reading because they will process. So anything in a room that moves, people will process it. It'll distract people. So a slide that advances grabs the attention of the people in the audience, right? So they're taking their eyes off you because they have to process what moves. It's inherent. It's part of our fight or flight system. We're like something moved and we go and process it. So what happens is if that's very dense, they will process the whole thing and they won't be listening to you. So right there, you just lost them for 30 seconds or longer. So I think that a big thing is to just kind of minimize the noise on your slides, plan and be empathy first, really talk to the audience. Get visual feedback from them. Are they leaning in? Are they falling asleep? Are they, smiling? Are they laughing? Like really look at how they're visibly demonstrating their response to your content and adapt on the fly to make sure your people receiving your message are receiving it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue as we're kind of start thinking about, we've all been a part or seen presentations that, you can just feel like either there's a lack of preparedness, too much information being thrown at those that are receiving it, et cetera. And it becomes really hard to follow. Or like one of my leaders always says, how do you make it easy for the receiver to follow the bouncing ball? Right. So that's why you have to think about things on what you're putting on the slides themselves. I'd just love to get kind of your take. And when we're thinking about how we're preparing our audiences for the material, what are some of those things that we should be thinking about to make it not only an effective communication or a way of communicating or a channel, if you will, but then the receiver is actually getting the maximum or the most of the information out of like anything that comes out of your mouth or is being visible on a slide?
Yeah, I think first you have to empathetically understand them. If I'm in a room with scientists of a very complicated niche, I can use my very complicated graphics. They're going to understand it. Like what is complicated to a novice is not complicated to your peers. So don't dumb it down for the experts and don't be over expert to the ones that needed it dumbed down. I don't want to say dumbed down, but simplified, made consumable for a broader audience. So I think sometimes I'm going to just say empathy about 100 times is really think about who's in your audience. Because even if a scientist is explaining a very complicated thing to the C-suite, that's also very different than it would be talking to your peers about it. Because the C-suite is listening for things that are going to impact the business. Is this going to make our revenue go up? It's going to make our revenue go down. How risky is this?
Right.
They're thinking through all those things. And if your content doesn't have what's on the mind of a CEO, even that, no matter what, the presenter or the expert needs to map to the audience. And how graphics or diagrams are used is all dependent on who's in the audience. But anytime words or a set of words can be turned into a picture or a process or be visualized, if people can see what you're saying, they'll understand you more. Sometimes we'll just have, I've gone to meetings where I just create an 11 by 17 placemat and we just all draw on it together to make sure that we all align on what the flow of it is or what the process of it is or what the components of something are that make up the whole. And then once you leave, after all having decided that the way we just redrew this is our shared truth, every time they see that graphic, they'll feel like, oh, I know what that is. There's a ton of meaning behind that. I was in the meeting where that was made, right? So there's just ways, I think, to connect to an audience and have the visuals actually amplify what you're trying to say.
Right.
Yeah. And to kind of build on that too, like, is there, like, are you, like, we talk about building decks all the time, but there's a difference though between like creating slides people remember. And I think it has to do with the empathy thing. And you could just say the answer is empathy, but it's different than just like spewing stuff onto a deck to complete a task versus building a presentation, I think, right?
Yeah. I mean, spewing things sounds like your monitor would get really wet if you were to do that. But yeah, that's what people do, right? What people default, we call it kind of Frankensteining a deck, Frankenslides, or Frankendeck, I think is what we call it. Anyway, you have to have a solid structure. So people, like what I do is I use slides like they're little 3x5 cards or sticky notes. So sometimes I'll just start with a title. I'll put a title on every slide, and then I arrange it, rearrange it, arrange it more, make sure it has an arc, and make sure it's an influential arc. And I'll also make sure that all the titles are worded in a way that if I were to just read across all of the titles, you would understand what it says. And so I work that first. Like, you shouldn't even really make a slide until you know that the arc is done and you know that it's, persuasive or inspirational flow. So I think through that, and then I think through, what is the purpose of this slide? So if that's the point I'm going to make, what's going to be the best way to visualize that point? And that's when we have a thing that we do here internally called a quick storm, where it's like, a client needs to communicate blah, blah, blah. Give me 3 ways to do that. So if it's like security and everyone just does like a lock and a key or a castle and a moat, but everyone does that. Yeah. So my team will be like, help us brainstorm something out of the box. It'll be like cell membrane or, like things like that are just different. And so you could use something that's a concept like that across your whole deck, or you could use it on a single slide. But think through each point you need to make and try to figure out the best way to visually amplify it. Sometimes it's a chart. Like sometimes a chart speaks 1,000 words. So just really thoughtfully think through what is going to be the best visual and what is the highest conceptual visual that will stick in their minds after they leave.
And now a short word from our sponsor.
This episode was sponsored by Quadical. Did I say that right? Quadical?
You did. Quadical. Yeah.
Quadical. Mark, what is it?
Well, V, I'm glad you asked. Quadical is my own company, actually. So, I'm the Sleeping Barber podcast co-host with you, but I also have my own company, and so I'm happy to sponsor the Sleeping Barber podcast. In part because I give so much time to it. But Quadical is a fractional marketing leadership firm where we specialize in evidence-based marketing. And we do consulting work for companies typically between $30 to $300 million, and helping them navigate some of the challenges that people have, like, I know something's broken, but I'm not quite sure how to fix it, nor do I have the time to fix it. And so that's where we help out a lot of people.
Well, I'll speak for Mark as well, because you're wearing your Quadical hat right now. We appreciate your sponsorship of the Sleeping Barber podcast. And for all of those that may be interested, we do have a whole bunch of sponsorship options. Always looking to bring on new sponsors. We have a lot of creative ideas that can really help across a global audience.
Thanks, V.
No, thank you, Quadical. We appreciate your business.
And now back to the show. And coming back to, V, back to the empathy thing, when you're talking about the cell membrane, like, again, going back to your audience, if it is a group of biologists, like, a cell membrane is perfect. Like, it's not foreign at all to them.
Mm-hmm. But you would unpack it. Like, you wouldn't just be cell membrane. You'd say the best way for this concept, is to unpack it. But like, if you look at the word partnership, right?
Yeah.
People just go straight for the handshake in front of the globe. But it could be 2 peas in a pod. Is this partnership perfect because we're alike? It could be salt and pepper. Is it because when we come together, we make something else very savory? Or is it like Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire's because we're just, so elegant together and it makes sense? Like, what is the nature of the partnership? And is there a way to visually describe it so people are like, wow, that was really beautiful. That was not a handshake in front of a globe.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
I think and this is where I would really love your input, because when I think about it in the context of our day to day as marketers, we're presenting, but then we're also trying to relay information. So sometimes when we're creating a lot of these slides that have a lot of information on them, it's because usually we're trying to do or try to use them in two different contexts all at the same time. Make sure like if it's a pre-read, people are getting all the information that they need as they come prepared to presentation. And then they're simply being repurposed in the presentation format. And it sounds like maybe we shouldn't be doing that. Maybe a pre-read needs to be something completely different. I know maybe there's a duplication in work here, but it just feels like we're not using the idea of presentation or PowerPoints or Google Slides, whatever, the right way. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. Yeah. So a pre-read, well, we have two. So there's a slideshow. There's like, I need to do a slide because there's the word presentation. Well, people use presentations very, very dense. Right. They use presentations to stand up in front of a cinematic experience. So we've kind of divided them into slideshow and Slidedoc. Okay. So a Slidedoc is readable. It's denser. Its complete sentence it's conceptual. Slidedocs are usually to inform or to make a recommendation is how we kind of divide that up. It's like you put a proposal in a denser internally, like if you were to present to your exec team, you need to know, hey, do they like a slideshow or do they want to read and have a conversation? Because a lot of people, a lot of companies, we're encouraging them, hey, just read for a few minutes and then use the meeting time when we're in the room together to have a conversation. And so there's the density thing is fair, but the slide doc is purpose built for a certain purpose. And you just need to understand it. So some people think like an internal update about how we're doing on a project. That can be a slide doc. It can have a higher density. We're only 4 feet away from the plasma display on the wall. And we all know, we're all familiar. We're doing that project update every single week. So we're familiar with the slides. The slides just had new numbers put in it. That doesn't justify every project manager every week to stand and deliver a cinematic talk, right? So you just got to make your own culture and say, hey, this nature of this kind of meeting, come prepared with this nature of this kind of meeting, come prepared with that. Now, when it comes to customers, that's a little bit different, but I think the nature of what we're doing is can drive how we show up. And we have clients who will ask us to make a slide doc for people who want to read, and the same thing as a slideshow for people who want to have it be presented. And that's when it's really high stakes. This is kind of save the world kind of stuff, because you want to say enough to open the door, but then they want to have you show up with a cinematic talk. For sales, you got to map out your sales process. Sometimes, and the salespeople need to listen, because sometimes they might say, well, how do you compare to your competitor? You don't need to go through an entire deck. Just have a 2-column thing that shows, with 6 points about how you beat the pants off your competitor. Yeah. And I think sometimes we're like, I need a whole deck. It's like, let me show you an image, or let me snap an image and pop it into the chat. So the more we can visualize, the better, but it doesn't mean you need to pop open a 40-page deck to answer the client's questions, just because that's, just 'cause it's like, so it just kind of all depends. It's all so situational and based on the audience.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you're saying that, it just occurred to me, like, there's so many, like, it's a tool, let's call it a tool, like a PowerPoint, let's say, is a tool, or Keynote, wherever you sit on that spectrum. But you're using it in a sales pitch, you're using it in a town hall, you're using it in like medical presentations, you're using it in that small group session you're talking about. Like, there's so many different situations for the same tool. Yep. And so, like, no wonder we mess it up so much, because we're just treating it like it's the same thing all the time.
Every culture is different, and we're noticing some trends. Like, I've been to 3 conferences this fall that I've attended, so I'm kind of trying to develop myself. I'm building software and stuff, so I'm going to a new nature of a new type of conference. And every single out of all 3 conferences, probably sat through 30 sessions. Only 2 had slides, and they were very short. It was all conversations. I think now we have that kind of, we listen to podcasts a lot like this. We're used to having conversations, and just the nature of how people stand and communicate is changing. So I think we also have to be aware that, how listeners listen and how communicators communicate is also, trending new ways. So town halls should sound more like a podcast, or keep their interest in some way.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, actually, because I don't think I've ever thought of it that way. The podcast explosion, and I think we're all now kind of shifting the way we consume content or the way we want to, receive the content. And it's funny that you say that, because it feels like when I put a podcast in my ears and I'm also like multitasking, it feels like I'm naturally more receptive to what's happening like in the moment in my ears versus say something else or when I'm being presented to, where sometimes I feel like I have to multitask more for some reason, but it could be by nature of we're always, we're getting pinged on the side on G chats or Teams and stuff like that. So you can't be 100% always focused. And maybe that's also creating a difficulty for us to receive some of this information, especially when, say, the slides aren't resonating or the verbal cues that you're getting aren't resonating. Naturally, I think we need to move on to something else because we're not being maybe stimulated.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Because who would have thought, like some of the podcasts I listen to are 90 minutes, hour and 20 minutes or whatever. And it's like, how interesting that I will choose to I'll make sure I have to clean out the mudroom because I'm going to listen to this thing. But when would we ever have in our earbud to listen to a 90-minute presentation? Like something's even different about, sitting at a conference and being like, oh my God, the session's 90 minutes. Yeah. But yet we'll listen to really good content. We will listen to good content. And we will set aside the time if it's really good.
Yeah, that's true. Similar kind of question in a little bit that, things have changed, the formats have changed, but also the amount of data has changed. Yeah. There's always been this idea around the explosion of data and, data everywhere and all that kind of stuff. But have you seen that influence throughout your career, from thinking back to day one in Apple versus whatever we're at now? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, even in my own business, right? What's so interesting, the only data we used to have was accounting data. We had the contact information, phone number, email, and billing information. That's all the data you ever had. And so when I would go to planning, you go to your, annual planning that I would do, I didn't have data. I had intuition. And I have a strong intuition, like a really strong and accurate intuition. And I actually wonder sometimes if there was data around, I wouldn't intuit, right? I wouldn't know how to have an intuitive sense, but I do now. Well, thank goodness. Now we'll be in planning and we'll be like, wow, we'll be dreaming about the future. And one of my execs will say, do you think we could find data to support this perspective? And it's like, it kind of almost can slow it down. What happens with data that's interesting? Like if you have data and maybe you have dashboards and you have marketing data, you have operational data, RevOps data, all the data, you can look at it. And when you're done assessing everything, you've either identified a problem or an opportunity. That's it. It's binary. It's either a problem or an opportunity. Once you've identified the problem and opportunity in the data, you have a communication problem or situation. You have a communication opportunity. So maybe a chart works, maybe a data point works. I call those like a sonar, where I'm like, ping, is my submarine going to stay safe? Because we're all driving these businesses in the dark, right? Nobody really knows. And maybe a chart works, but a lot of times we need to move people to action from what the data says to do, to take advantage of the opportunity or dissuade away from the problem or solve the problem. So I think communicating data through story is like the most effective way to get people to, help your company reach its goals. I love that. I wrote a body of work called Data Story, and it's by far our most popular course. Not by far, but it is. It's the most popular.
No, and I don't know. I can see why, if you think just the amount of data that we have now available to us as marketers, especially ever since the rise of performance marketing, et cetera, how you craft those stories becomes naturally very important. And I'm curious now, because sometimes the data isn't enough, right? Like you can have a great data story. At what point, though, can you think about, or like, when we think about the data, what is the consideration we have on the design side as well? So how do you actually bring those data points to life as well? It probably has a big, I guess, really high probability of that actually resonating with the audience as well. Do you have any ideas on that, or how we can become better?
What happens is, the person that's dug in the data and they're like, okay, I've found this problem or opportunity. And they're like, I think I'm going to grab that one bar chart and have all my insights rest on that one bar chart. Well, you better make that bar chart communicate a heck of a lot. So you have to do things like highlight what's important, minimize everything else. You also need to annotate. So if the main point is that bar 3 is 25% higher than bar 4, you can annotate that. You can you can do a pointer. You can have a bracket there that says, hey, this is a $25 billion gap between these two bars, and even put a big sunburst behind it both. Like, really make it clear that it's a glance medium. I mean, people really, they're supposed to be able to look at a slide and process it in 3 seconds, because you don't want them processing the slide forever and not listening to what you said. So the whole time they're processing your slide, they're not listening to you. So you need them to get the point right away. So you have a bar chart, highlight what's important, annotate what's important, so they walk away with the same interpretation of that you have. Now, I highly recommend that people can use tools, AI like ChatGPT and Claude and different tools. You can upload a chart and just say, tell me every single perspective someone else might interpret from this chart.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
I haven't thought about that.
It eliminates bias. I'll say, give me 5 ways this chart, someone in an audience might interpret this chart. That way you can say, I know you might be noticing that Q1, blah, blah, blah. And I know you might also notice da, da, da. And the reason I'm not addressing those two phenomenon in the data is because of da, 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 da. Like, at least then,
this is
if
great.
it's high stakes, like most charts, they'll just pop down like an M&M.
Sure.
But sometimes they're going to have an issue with a chart, but it's a great way to just check yourself too, to make sure you're not approaching the data with bias. We're coming up with a really beautiful suite of tools that automate, like massive. It just automates a lot of heavy lifting for you, and in that nature of that kind of a, bias elimination and different stuff like that.
That is a great
it's
nugget.
so good. Again, kind of that empathy, because you're anticipating, you're doing that because you want to understand what people, they might see it.
Yeah, exactly.
Just get ahead of it.
Yeah. And speaking of which, I want to dig into the structure of great talks a little bit, because there's a few things you've mentioned so far. So, like, having a single slide that has a word on it, and then arranging these single ideas into a cohesive story, not jamming stuff full of content and all that kind of stuff, anticipating what the audience is going to feel. Maybe if you could just talk a little bit about the structure of great talks. Like, I was joking earlier, I think I've seen it 1,000 times. It maybe not 1,000, but it's up there for me. Like, it's such a good
thank you
talk, and it is so profound, I think, in the way that you the structure that you created. I just would love it if you could talk a little bit about that, because there's so much to unpack in that story.
Yeah. We've been covering a lot on visuals, and what happened was my first book was about visuals. So I started seeing, users, presentation makers start to make pretty okay slides. But then I was like, the deck is still crappy. Like, it's like putting lipstick on a pig. The core fundamental story itself needed work. And so I literally just learned everything I could about story for 3 years. I would get up at 4 or 5 in the morning and just study and read and I studied all the speeches I could find. I had a book called The 100 Greatest Speeches of All Times. I just kept going back to it and saying, what is it about speeches? There's got to be an element from story in these speeches. There's got to be a reason why I get the chills in some of these greatest speeches, but I'm falling asleep in all the PowerPoint. And I wanted to find patterns, like what was going on. And so what I discovered is there was a component from story that is used in the greatest speeches. And what that is this, all stories have this kind of rise, a cathartic rise, and then a release. And that kind of rise and fall is from the building of tension and releasing it. So there's a build of tension and it releases, build of tension and releases. And so I thought, once I thought I found this pattern, to see if I found it, I always would, the litmus test was if it worked with Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech and if it worked with a business speech. And I chose Steve Jobs' iPhone launch speech. And so when I overlaid it, I literally cried. To analyze Steve Jobs' talk, I used 1/4-inch graph paper, and it was about 40 feet long because I was not digital. I was analog, and I would literally write the phrases that were what is by hand and fill it all in. And, I just thought, wow, it worked. Well, his talk was 90 minutes, so no wonder it was so freaking long. But so the structure of it is that to create that cathartic rise and fall that a story has is you vacillate between what currently is and what could be. And by painting a picture of the current realities juxtaposed to where you need to go to get the goals realized, where the company needs to go to reach its goals, or this beautiful future you're trying to get your customers to adopt, you just move back and forth. Like, here's what is, here's what could be, here's what is, here's what could be at the structural level. And what happens is that suddenly the status quo is just not as appealing and your brighter future is more alluring. And you could do that at the structure level. And then also, some people do it even at the phrase level where it's like, what is, what could be, blah, 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 what is, what could be. And so it's really beautiful. So you can actually map it. I mapped it out in my TED Talk, which you've been referencing, which I love. Thank you very much. But it's a spark line. So we call it a persuasive spark line. And it's the shape. It's like a pumpkin tooth shape, you could call it, but it's just the line that moves up and down over time, where you can actually analyze and see how much is spent talking about what is juxtaposed to what could be. So you capture that rise and fall of tension. I'm doing that. I think I'm a nerd. I'm a spoken word data nerd.
It's great. Like, I mean, I also spent a chunk of my career in sales. So I instantly recognized it as, and I think you mentioned in the talk, it's like sailboats tacking, but it like connected with me because I had done so much objection handling. At that point in my career, I was just like, oh, this totally makes sense. And it's kind of like those hidden objections. I'm like, that totally makes sense. Of course they're going to have objections. And so it was a way of, in a monologue, also being empathetic with people and trying to anticipate what kinds of objections they would have. I never thought about uploading the slide and asking ChatGPT to tell me what the objections would be. But
now you can do that.
It's so, Yeah,
the part you're talking about is the part of my TED Talk where there is a physics phenomenon that if you capture the wind in the sail at just the right way, your vehicle, your boat, can travel faster than the wind itself. And it's harnessing the wind. And if you, in a presentation, if you harness the resistance and understand it and address it, they'll get faster. It's the same thing. They'll get to your idea and agreement with your idea faster if you address, everything and come up with a counter argument like, oh, I know you might be thinking blah, blah, and blah, but blah, blah, blah. I mean, just that simple, maybe do it twice. And then they're like, oh, wow. Yeah. They considered my perspective and she's right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Let's move on. I won't be entrenched against you anymore or whatever. So, that just makes so much sense. Sounds like you're a sailor, tactic, so you used to sail.
Me? Never. No. Nope. No. But I just remember that part of this. I always thought it was really cool, but no, it just made so much, the analogy made so much sense to me. I didn't know the thing about the speed part either, but it's interesting. Like your cell analogy and like picking the right analogy for the right, it just worked for me. Man.
That's cool.
What you were just talking about, Nancy, I think is really important as marketers, as communicators. We have to get better at, because when I think about anytime we're presenting and you're anticipating objections and et cetera, or you're preemptively putting it there, I think it actually creates a different dynamic between the audience. Like, I know you're probably thinking that our visits are down year over year, but actually here's the reason why. So you're almost like seeding questions that may play into your story arc or may play into, the narrative that you're trying to build, just by playing that, I guess that objection game, if you will, a little bit. Yeah. And I think that's where we actually, as marketers, probably fall too short sometimes, because sometimes we'd like to stay in our own kind of echo chambers, be really concerned on the type of language that we're using. And we're not actually bringing the audience in. And even though we're storytellers by profession, I think we actually struggle doing that, especially in the internal forums, in a real impactful way.
Marketers are caught. They're like this sandwich between the customers and internally having to pitch for budget or increase a budget. And you're right. It's a big job. It's a big job based in data.
And most of us don't speak finance very well either.
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah.
But even
people get into marketing, I think
it happens
so creative and transformative. And I think then they get in the seat and it's like both sides of their brains have to be alive and clicking and ticking. And it's a big job.
Even from an executive point of view, like we've all sat through these kinds of presentations, like here's the strategy this year. Yeah. Go forth and be prosperous and all that kind of, and then you're left at the end going, what the fuck are we doing? What well, now what? Who's, and then your manager comes out like, I think what he was trying to say was, it's so interesting because then like you think your job is done, but it so often isn't, because there's more questions than, because you probably a lot of times never answered the objections in the presentation.
Exactly. And that, I think that's the power of thoughtful communication. Like I do a vision meeting every year, and I mean, I work on it all over the holiday. We do it every January during MLK week, because, he had a vision and we have a vision. And wow, my whole exec team, we spend probably 100 hours. Each of us spend a lot of time. My designers get in. We do beautiful slides for ourselves, which is so funny because my own design team, like if there's really crappy slides, it's like this vision has very low credibility to me. And so when it's high stakes and you want traction faster, I think an executive presentation by a marketer, you need to gather other people and say, can you poke holes in this? Or do you know Susie, who's the CMO, how does she like to receive information? How does the CEO like to receive information? Like, really thinking through what it is you could do to get them to adopt your idea is genius. Cause then you don't have to go and, like you're saying, do all these little sub meetings and, oh my gosh, what just happened? I didn't nail it. Yeah. And it just creates so much traction. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great points. You've been doing this for a while, haven't you, Nancy?
Yeah. I'm a grandma now though. And I love what I'm doing. I have the execs running the businesses. I have a consultancy agency, and then I have a hair fob too, but I have a consultancy agency and I have a training business. They're running that whole thing for me. So I could peel away and just invent again. So I actually feel more energized in my role than I've probably been in a decade. I'm just like, what about this? What about that? And so I'm really happy right now. Because I think I have to do that. Just to stay, at the edge. If we're going to be at the edge and the leader, I feel like I've been not at the edge of the market. I've been like in the comfortable part of the market. So you'll see new fun things from us.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
That's exciting.
The Duarte method, is it the same as the structure great talks, or is it a different, like, does it kind of incorporate all of these things that we were talking about together?
Yeah, the Duarte method is just, it's super simple. It's three circles overlapped in a Venn diagram. And in the very middle where the three circles overlap is empathy. So the three circles, one is story, one is visuals. We don't say slides. So one is visuals and one is how you deliver it. Now, delivery could be how you stand and deliver and how you flail your arms or not. But delivery is also, do I use a slide doc for this? What's the right delivery vehicle for this? Should I maybe send a video? Do I stand and deliver? So it's those things. So it's story, which includes the spark line is one component of story. And then visuals, the reason we don't say slides is it might be that you, like one time, huge multinational, the guy in India from a huge multinational needed to come here to the Silicon Valley and ask for $100 million budget. So he calls and was like, can you make me 5 slides? And we're like, you're going to sit across the table from the CEO and ask for $100 million. We think you just need to do an impassioned plea. And so here's 3 graphics, practice drawing them. At this point, just grab a piece of paper off his desk, just draw it, just walk up to the whiteboard and draw it. He was like, and he got his money and he called and he goes, that was the funnest thing. I had so much fun. And that's why it's visual. So anyway, again, it's story, visuals, delivery, all overlapping, with empathy in the middle. So the way that, kind of dovetails with the spark line, which is that kind of rise and fall, is the spark line falls squarely in the story circle, because it is one component of many that we use to convey content through story. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Like, I imagine a lot of the things you're inventing have to do with this method and like developing further some of the ideas around it and the tools and the materials and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I'm having fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man,
you nailed it. Nailed it.
That
You're a
is
marketer.
really cool.
I could tell. Yeah.
It's so cool. One quick thing for me, I know we're short on time, but like there's a lot in that case you just gave. So the guy's out there, he's asking for $100 million instead of just doing the 5 slides. You give him the opportunity to practice drawing a couple of things. Like, how I imagine he might have just picked and choose which ones to draw at different times, and maybe because he had feedback in a small group setting like that, I imagine. How important is?
Yeah, we gave him a mental model, an organizing principle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, and then when we knew what would come up, so he had his verbal narrative, and then we anticipated all the questions, and it was fun. It was very different than just, designing slides.
Yeah. And I guess where my question was going with that one is, like, you talked earlier about like cueing in on the audience in some way and reading their body language and things like that. How important is it for somebody to stick with the plan versus be flexible in a presentation?
Yeah, I think some people think a presentation is you are a train and you are on a train track and you just cannot deviate. And we like to have presenters that realize they are flying a helicopter, right? It's like more like a dragonfly. It could swoop, it could swoop. So you really probably shouldn't take a stage if you're not a subject matter expert of what you're doing. And you should be adaptable. Like, I have a story of someone who went and spoke at a conference, and he could just tell, like, everyone was like, he had a keynote there. Everyone was just checked. He didn't nail it. Whatever he was delivering was not resonating with the audience. So 10 minutes in, he goes, I messed up. I messed up. I need to give you your time back. But if I promise you, if I come back and do this for free next year, would you give me a second chance? And they're like, yeah, he got this next year. He came back, he got a standing ovation, and everyone clapped that they got their time back. So it really is about like making sure that you resonate. So I have this. The reason empathy is kind of in the middle of everything we do is in my TED Talk, I was the first to talk about how the audience is the hero and the presenter is the mentor. Well, Yoda, and think of Yoda and Luke. Yoda was a Jedi master. He'd gone around and around and learned all these lessons for like 900 years. He's short and tiny and green.
Yeah.
He's very old. And so as a presenter, we have to be that person who knows a lot about a lot, and that we're coming alongside this audience who needs to learn. And they're maybe on their first loop around this, around the Death Star. And we're there for them as the presenter. So,
I love the Star Wars. Like, I don't know if you noticed this. Like, I'm a big fan, so this is good.
Did you like that? Yeah. So I don't know. We just got to also understand who we are in the room, and that's also an empathy play there too. So
yeah.
I've been really looking forward to ask this question. So if you had to sum up some of your biggest ahas over the years, is there one or two ideas that really resonate the most?
Yeah, I mean, I like I said, I think I would say empathy 1,000 times. I think it's a void for a lot of leaders, a lot of communicators. And so people talk about it, but everything, like how my consultants and designers and storytellers show up, it's the basis of every course. So as I try to kind of claw my own way in being a more empathetic leader, I found that if leaders could work on empathy and their storytelling skills harder, it really would cure a lot of the problems in the world and would also create an enormous amount of opportunities in the world. And if I was to double down on those two things, you know, that's what the big aha is. And I think that those are the two things that I think resonate with me the most. You know, I've got personal ahas, I've got leadership ahas, but if you're talking about my body of work, everything you see that will ever come out from me until I die will be about empathy, and being empathetic, and then using story as a vehicle to communicate. It's not super it's not like I haven't covered that already. I wish it was a new aha. I think people might have been able to figure that one out.
But it's funny because I think it's almost meditative in a way. Like the more you think about something like that, the more you focus on it, the deeper it is. And the more you realize you don't understand it nearly as well as you thought you did.
I love that comment. That's how I feel. And I think that shows your wisdom that you feel that way, because I could spend the rest of my life.
Who, Mark? No, I'm just kidding.
Both of you are wise.
Oh, there we go.
Well, I think we were very wise to ask you to come on the show.
I think so.
You're so cute. That's so nice.
It was really so interesting talking to you about this. How could people find out more about what you're doing and the things you're inventing and all the amazing work you're doing?
So company is at Duarte.com, and up there you can sign up, get newsletters. I'm pretty active, somewhat active on LinkedIn. I post a few times a week. That's where my announcements go. But I have a newsletter, like a personal subscription newsletter through LinkedIn. That's nice. I write for MIT, HBR, Forbes, different pubs. So if you're looking for announcements and stuff, a lot of that will happen on LinkedIn. The company can be followed on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I mean, just kind of on all the places. But I would love to meet anybody who liked the content here. Congratulations to the two barbers. How did you
snip, snip, snip.
Understand it. How come you're barbers?
The which?
How come you're barbers?
Oh, great question.
Okay.
Go, Mark.
Okay, so this probably actually around the same time that I saw your TED Talk. I was looking for the name of I started my own company doing consulting for marketing related things. And I was I had this idea that there's a lot more value between the silos than by focusing on any one silo, like sharing information between different groups and different departments. And so that was kind of one of the things I thought you can, have a huge impact on business outcomes and on customer experience by focusing on connecting the silos in between organizations. So that was the idea of the business. And then I was looking for a name. I was trying to find something that resonated with that. And then I stumbled across this thing called the sleeping barber, which is a computer science problem, which is that there's computer scientists have to the coding it's a coding assignment to say, okay, there's a barber and he can either sleep or cut hair. And another room is a waiting room where there's X number of chairs. And so you have to code the software to make it so that the barber sleeps when there's nobody waiting and then cuts hair when there's people in the chairs.
I have been in tech for I don't even want to say, since 88, and I've not heard that term. I was like, oh, they must love Barber of Seville.
I mean, at this point.
Yeah, we'll take it. Anyway, it was just one of those ones, and I had a criteria. I was like, well, it should be memorable. It should be easy to spell. It should be, somewhat fun to pronounce. And
yeah, that's great.
So that was the gist behind it. Yeah.
Very clever.
So So you're officially your favorite podcast now?
Of the day.
Officially my freshest favorite.
There it is. Well said, Nancy. Well said. I love that.
Yeah, it was great having you on. So much fun. And thanks for sharing everything that you've learned over the years on this topic. It's so valuable. It's so great.
Yeah, it was really, you guys did a great job. It was very fun to talk to you with you.
Well, I appreciate that.
If you like this show, please leave a review. And even if you didn't, we'd love to make this show better, and your feedback will help us do that.
Looking for like 3 pages of notes.
Oh, yeah. Hey, V.
Yo.
It is the Post Pod. And
Hey! What? Go.
let's do this with alliteration. It's the Post Pod with no pneumonia.
Like, where are you going with this?
Yeah.
You can everyone that's listening, you can just hear it in Mark's voice that my guy's back.
Oh, I was
He's back.
literally dying. Yeah. I was joking around with you before, but I really like breathing.
Yeah.
It's so great.
Kind of vital, isn't it, eh?
Yeah. Even at that, I still have some coughs and whatnot, but
That's okay.
yeah.
Well, great to
don't
have you
feel like I'm
back.
dead.
Great to have
Yeah.
you back, man. You seem like you're
I was on the brink. Drugs are wonderful.
You should have told me sooner. I would have sent you some soup.
Oh. Wow. Well, let's talk about this soup for the soul with Nancy Duarte. Well, it wasn't quite exactly soup for the soul, but I mean, considering we do so
Soup
much
for the
in
creative
decks, yeah, like it kind of is soup for the soul. Having
Totally.
that conversation with her.
Totally.
What'd you think?
Man, like I'm half joking. I have literally 3 pages of notes from our conversation with her. And I think what I love most is I felt like someone understood me. Like they knew what I was going through. They understood the struggles. They understood the, things that you could be doing differently. So I definitely appreciated it. And I'm sure a lot of you listeners would have been, oh my goodness, like where were you all my life?
Yeah. Yeah.
So good. So good.
Yeah. Where do you want to start with that? Like,
Well, just off the top of my head, there's a couple things that really stood out. And this may not seem groundbreaking in any way, but she talked about like the 2 things that you need to kind of think about when you're putting together your presentations and things like that. It's like, first of all, you need to definitely understand emphatically. I think she said it specifically, emphatically understand the audience.
yeah.
Don't dumb it down for the experts. Like
Right.
the ones that are in the room that are the know, they're in the know. Like make sure you're speaking to their, I don't want to demean anyone, but their intelligence level. So then if it's like you're getting the most out of that presentation,
Yeah.
and then definitely use those visual aids as much as possible. Like get away from text. I know, Mark, you're a great presenter, and like you're famously just put like one image up on the screen and you just talk to it. You have like no notes, no text, nothing like that. And I think that for me again is really interesting. Now, here's the thing, the kicker, if you will, for marketers. We'd like to do one thing we like to put together a presentation that can do and serve multiple purposes. So sometimes it's like you're sharing the deck up front. So you can't just send a deck that has a whole bunch of images in it, because people won't understand what the red line is. So we often are adding things like images and things to that effect. So also understand what is it that you're trying to do. So like there is places for more of our traditional decks, but then when you're presenting it, you're not presenting the facts on the deck. You're building a talk track around what people could visually read themselves. But that balance between a visual and text has to skew visual.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was a really interesting point that she made, just to build on what you're saying, like the idea of like, people, partnerships, and there's always that slide with people shaking hands in front of a globe.
Yeah.
It's just like, there's so many ways to do that. And
Totally.
so like the empathy component of what you were talking about, understanding your audience, thinking about who they are, what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Taking that single idea of partnerships, there could be a bazillion ways to do that.
Literally.
That are so much more impactful than just shaking hands in front of a globe.
Yeah.
The one thing that kind of made me rethink a little bit about that, though, is also explaining what it is, right? Like, so I think she talked about a cell membrane. There could be a partnership analogy, or she talked about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. And so, like, one thing just to put up a picture of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, but another thing to explain what it is that makes that so great.
Right.
I think we all have this shorthand around handshaking in front of a globe where you go, oh, it's a partnership. Sure.
Yeah.
It's just a bit more work on the side of the presenter.
Yes.
To bring that better analogy forward and make it more like of an aha and impactful.
Yeah.
That I think is really important. And, you know, coming back to the empathy thing, it's important, like, to pick the right image for the audience.
Totally.
Yeah.
No, and I absolutely love that. And like, it's such a small detail, but it's what separates a good presentation from a great presentation. Right. And I think, like, again, often if I look at our day-to-days, we're just trying to compound as much information as possible to get it out to the client, try to get it to our leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes maybe we just don't have the time to go back and really think things through, or then we're retrofitting what we've prepared for a true presentation. Because she did talk about, like, there's a slideshow and then a slide doc, right? There's kind of two different things. So know what is it that you're actually building. Even though, like I said, we as marketers, we try to do as much as we can in one area to hope, like, it can check as many boxes as possible. But the other thing that I thought that was really interesting was, like, make sure you're building that tension, or building of tension, and then releasing of that tension. And I thought, like, in my mind, I just could see, like, how do you build up to that crescendo, if you will, and then, like, here's how we're going to solve this problem, or whatever. So you're constantly creating this wave of emotion in a presentation that then holds or captures the audience to the fullest capacity or the fullest ability, especially where most of this stuff that we're doing right now is virtual, and it's easy to multitask than ever before.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, and I like the point you made about the slideshows versus slide docs. I think so often we build these slide docs often, which tons of information on a slide, and we're sending it. I think that was one of the points you made earlier about during the presentation or during the interview about we build these decks as pre-reads almost.
Yeah, 100%.
And then we use the same decks as our presentation for the slideshow.
Yeah.
It's not the show. It's just reread. And then there's a problem there, because then people's natural inclination is to either read or listen, and you don't do both. So then you're just going to read and you don't listen to the thing that's being presented. Yeah.
See, like, it's like a ding, ding, ding moment like that. At least that's the way it was for the entire conversation. But like, it was like, you're right. Like, they're mutually exclusive. They can build from one another. They're not the same thing, though. And I think all too often we don't take that extra step to say, okay, now I'm presenting this to leadership. I'll just fire up that doc again, that slideshow. We'll just walk you through the slides. It's like, it's different. It's not the same.
She also talked about not using decks a couple times.
What?
Yeah. Remember, because she was talking about, like, you can use a napkin. And, you know, if you're trying to, like, depending on what the objective is that you're trying to do, like, a deck might not be the answer for every solution or for every problem, which I thought was really interesting. Oh, that was the other thing too about when we talked about data, how much data there is, and everybody's got data and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. It didn't always be that way. And how when you have data, you're kind of presenting, once you get all the data, you kind of have either a problem or an opportunity. But then after that, there's a communication challenge.
Right.
And so it's not always enough just to show data. Like, you got to build story around that to be able to communicate and influence people to move into a direction of solving the problem or investigating the opportunity or whatever the thing is that you're trying to do. But like, storytelling, like, data only gets you so far.
No, you're right. And sometimes we believe, like, the moment we just throw data up on our screen, that's enough. It's like, okay, we're good. Let's wash our hands clean of that. We put the data up there. It's a plus 30%. No one's going to ask any questions.
Right.
But often what happens is, like, well, there is a presenters with knowledge that may feel alienated, sometimes may not understand the data, may not know what questions to ask. But then that's your role as a presenter, is to make sure like this information, the way it's being presented, especially when you're presenting data, you're presenting in a way that anyone could ask a question.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
What else did you? What else stood out for you?
I'm just trying to I think the big one for me was really the idea of building decks is different from persuasive communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we've kind of talked a little bit about that a few different ways, but it isn't the same thing. And so, really stepping back at the beginning of the presentation or the beginning of the interview, she talked about how important it is just to lay out a structure.
Yeah.
Like a couple words per slide, and then you build your deck that way. And you can use that structure of kind of what you were talking about before. I think assuming there's objections, try to figure out how to resolve those objections, but building that out with a couple of very simple words per slide to figure out what your story is.
Totally.
And that's a very different process than in general, just throwing stuff onto a deck.
Well, maybe I could share this secret with listeners, but we sometimes, for some of our podcasts, we prepare with a tool called Coggle, right? Remember, it's like that flow chart where you're the building of idea, and you can kind of wrap around where do you want to come full circle. I feel like that tool, or a tool like that, is a great way to organize your thoughts and where is it that you want to go. And you can really pressure test it. It's does it make sense from starting here and then transitioning here? Is it building that, that emote, or sorry, what did she call it? She called it, why am I blanking right now? The tension, building of that tension. Are you building that tension, or then are you releasing it? And you could just apply that framework. I feel like it becomes somewhat, you can create a really cohesive story. By also then keeping in the back of your mind, even the Duarte method, where, it talks about the delivery, the story, and this is what you're alluding to, but, and visuals. And at the heart of that, it's all strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think so often we talked about this a little bit with her as well, but just communication in general, I think we oversimplify how
important it is.
Well, how easy it is. You know what I mean? I did a presentation.
Yeah, it's done.
Well, was it? I mean, even at that point, you go is it a slide doc? Or is it a slideshow?
Yeah.
Because if it's a slide doc and you're presenting that, there's a very good chance that nobody heard anything you said.
Totally.
Because they're just reading all the things that are on the slides.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, she did talk about the two biggest gaps that she sees right now, just, in our industry, or generally speaking. I don't think it's just our industry specifically, but it's there is that lack of empathy, or the void of it, and storytelling. It's just not, maybe the right word is here is there's just not a strong skill set around that ability to storytell.
Yeah.
And you'd think, again, we've talked about, I don't know, man, how many episodes ago, or it feels like it always comes up in any episode, but for being creative and storytellers externally to consumers, we struggle with storytelling internally. And it starts by the way we're presenting.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And the tools that we're using to presenting often is a PowerPoint.
Yep.
But as we said before, there's so many ways you can use it. Totally. And so just because it's a PowerPoint doesn't mean that you've achieved your outcome. You know what I mean?
Almost there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one part as well that she talked about it being a glance medium. And I think kind of related to what we talked about with, the more information there is, if people are reading, they're not listening. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Just thinking about it is it's almost as though the presenter is the guide.
Yeah.
You want them to glance the slide.
Yeah.
But you want the presenter to be the person to help bring them along. Yep. Even similar to that when we were talking about the handshake versus the Fred Astaire. they glance the image, but then there's like the presenter is the guide that helps them understand what they're seeing and absorb it.
Right.
In a way that, because the presenters put all the empathy into understanding the audience and who they are and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There's this over dependence, I think, on the slides to carry all the information and do the heavy lifting. Whereas
Totally.
I think it really is on the presenter to ensure that the message that they're trying to communicate is the thing that people hear.
You know, I love that you brought that up, because there's moments when you're presenting data, and sometimes it's a row of data. It's just the way it has to be represented or presented. Like, there's no way about it. And sometimes for a lot of people, they may read charts a lot differently than others, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to really create, like, follow the bouncing ball. And like a tactic sometimes that I use is like, I will number like the areas that we're going to speak to. It's like 1, 2, 3. Mm-hmm. And I put the number, like the little number beside the number that I actually want to talk to. So then I'm already telling the audience, we're going to talk about these 3 numbers specifically as a part of this big chart. Now, if you have the mental capacity to do a lot of other processing as I'm presenting, you do you. But then it really helps okay, we're talking about this number first, this conversion rate number. Then here's your revenue number or your RGU number. And I just find like that helps with keeping the people, or like, you know, I like to say, like, just follow that bouncing ball as more methodical as possible, or being as methodical as possible in doing so. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, because that comes back to the idea of like guiding people, right? The idea of like, you can put a lot of stuff onto a slide.
Totally.
But then what do you want people to pay attention to? And what is the thing that you want people to follow?
Totally.
Yeah.
It's not, there are a lot of people that can build great decks. They look great and whatnot. But there's an art in being able to present that as at the same level that maybe it's being visually prepared for. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think we can do a lot better in creating more of those, applying a lot of these different, you know, frameworks to really storytell. Mm-hmm. And then again, at the end of the day, just do the work justice.
Yeah. Oh, one last thing for me that was stood out. Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked about a chart or a slide or a deck or table, whatever. And then she had that other tip about load it into like ChatGPT or whatever.
Yeah.
And then ask it to interpret it like 5 different ways.
Yeah.
I'm like,
prepare for questions.
Yeah. Like, how could, you know, a CEO interpret this? How could a specialist interpret this? How could the CFO interpret? Like,
totally.
So good. I thought that was so, because then you could like actually, you know, tweak the chart, not to say manipulate it so that it doesn't show what it actually meant to show, but highlight different things about it, change the colors or whatever.
Totally.
Annotate it, all those kinds of things.
All of them.
Yeah.
So, that's such a great call out. Yeah. If I was wearing that hat, I tip my hat right now. It was good. Nancy, if you're listening, it was great having you on. Absolutely phenomenal. We'll probably look to reach out to you again at some point. But it was really, really great. A lot of great tips and insights. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Now since you're feeling better, I know you can go chase that profitability now. So what
I am going to try. I'm going to actually try to run up the stairs and see if I can catch them without dying on the way.
Yeah, you got this, buddy.
Yeah.
You got this.
All right, man.
All right. Have a great day. Yeah, of course.